Hello, everyone. I'll try to see if I can make up a little time so we can get back on schedule. What I'd like to do is basically address how many of you in this room are already involved in helping to reestablish and consolidate Florida's position as the dominant space port on the planet, and help you better understand that your engagement and what you do is going to be a critical part of Florida's future that is coming a lot faster than most people anticipate. Let me get my notes so I stay on track. First thing I want to do is touch base on what Space Florida is. I think I What do I point this at? There we go. This is just my obligatory chart that I always have to put up to explain what Space Florida is, because most people don't know. We're a special district of the state. The best way to view us is we're like an airport or a seaport authority, but we're a spaceport authority, and we have jurisdiction throughout the state. We have projects in Pensacola and down here in South Florida, Tampa, Jacksonville. But I'm going to focus for the purposes of this conference on what we do primarily on the space side of things. What do I point? Very good. Figured it out. Basically, to those of you who've paid a great deal of attention, about 10 years ago, Florida was really sucking wind in the space business when the shuttle retired, and we were doing about 6 or 7 launches a year. In 2021, we did 35 launches, and last year we did 57 launches. This year, we're scheduled to do 92 launches, so we're a couple of years away from getting to what we anticipate is going to be a couple hundred launches a year. That's a busy rate of growth. NASA still does. They're pretty steady customers. Space Force, pretty steady customers. But all of this growth, the big growth, is driven by the commercial sector, primarily Elon Musk. But we've got new vehicles coming on from Jeff Bezos. We should have a new vehicle coming up that's an entirely 3D printed rocket. So we're getting all kinds of neat stuff going on in the space business. And Space Florida's role is we're like a port authority. We own equipment, we can finance it, we build facilities and lease them. Jeff Bezos has almost 2 million square feet of brand new manufacturing space right across from our office. We own that and lease it back to him. That's just sort of what we do. We've been a critical part of growing that transformation of the Cape and of Florida to becoming the dominant spaceport on the planet. I think we've financed, right now, we're almost at $3 billion worth of infrastructure. We're due to be $5 billion in a couple of years, and our goal is to be $10 billion of infrastructure that we've financed by the end of the decade. The neat thing is it's private sector money. It's not tax dollars. All of our financial agreements are not backed by the full faith and credit of the state of Florida. That makes the gods we answer to in Tallahassee very happy. It's strictly a business transaction. So we've been effective in that. In addition to that, we also work very closely with Florida Department of Transportation. And one of the neat things that is neat about Florida that has helped us get where we are today is that for a couple of decades now, Tallahassee has recognized space as its own independent mode of transportation. Same as railroads, highways, airports, seaports. We get about $50 million a year as a minimum amount of money that goes into space infrastructure. Sometimes it's over $100 million a year. It depends upon whether or not there's good projects to invest in. But Tallahassee's been extremely leaning forward for really almost a generation, and that's a big part of why Florida is where we are today and why every state in the union and almost every country in the world would like to be where we are today. That's just sort of our toolkit. Again, that's the Cape that we deal with, Cape Canaveral Spaceport. Most of that is NASA property, and a small amount, that's 147,000 acres of NASA property and roughly 20,000 Space Force property. It's really neat because this is the largest stretch of undeveloped property on the east coast of the United States of America. And when you fly over it, it looks like North Korea. It's dark. But that's a cool thing. It's a great nature preserve. Fish and Wildlife manages most of what's undeveloped, and we've only developed about less than 5% of it. I think it gives you an idea what we're focused on, but there's also a spaceport in Jacksonville at Cecil Field, and there's spaceport territory in the Panhandle. It's been inoperative for a while, but it's there. We're trying to build the state of Florida as an entire component of a Florida spaceport system. Obviously, the Cape's the dominant one. We invest in a lot of infrastructure, buildings. NASA turns it over to us. We've owned a launch pad since 1997. This is just what we do as a port authority. And I think one of the, like I said, we own the infrastructure, facilities, equipment, and we help work things like this is an example of the port and the spaceport, and our goal is to help. We're very involved in bringing pipelines, helium, natural gas. Helium pipelines had to be significantly expanded to accommodate the commercial sector because Air Force and NASA had existing helium pipelines, and helium's a critical part of any launch activity. But we needed to get involved in expanding that for the growth of the commercial sector and to accommodate getting to hundreds of launches a year. We're putting in a new liquefied natural gas pipeline because most of the new vehicles that are coming on board are using methane as their primary propellant. So all of this is good, but we're involved in helping build this out for the state so we can continue to grow. We also have been working very closely with Florida Power and Light to bring a lot of new capability to the grid because these systems demand a lot of electrons, and the existing system wasn't prepared to provide what they needed. So we're involved in doing that. Additionally, the bridges, NASA has not 5 bridges that were built out here in the mid-60s when we were taking off in the race to the moon with the Russians, with the Soviets. And NASA does, like many agencies, didn't do a real good job of maintaining them, so they're starting to degrade rather rapidly, and the state's been able to come in and help pick up some of the slack and take over a lot of those bridges. This is a neat project we're doing for Space Force. They have asked us to do a wharf study. The green areas are areas where vessels can berth to do business for space, because what's interesting is you have the fastest growing, the most successful spaceport on the planet immediately adjacent to the second busiest cruise port on the planet. And that creates conflict. I'll get to some of that later in a minute. But we are doing, SpaceX right now is operating furiously. They just had another launch this morning at 2 a.m. But they have 7 vessels on their fleet, and they want to berth them in Port Canaveral, and Port Canaveral doesn't have room for them. What makes things interesting is Blue Origin also has the port as part of its critical path. They have about 7 or 8 vessels that they also want to berth, and there ain't room for them. Plus, you've got Relativity, the 3D printed rocket. They want to go to maritime activities. There's a new cruise vessel, a new space tourism. It's a balloon that takes you up in a gondola up to, it's suborbital, but it'll take you up into space where you can see the blackness of Earth, see the curvature of the Earth, the blackness of space. And the neat thing about going up in a gondola is it takes a long time, and you can go up there, and in the gondola is a bar. I just think that's cool as hell. But we're doing this for Space Force because this is a critical part of accommodating a growing industry, a growing transportation industry. And this is just a slide for Space Force because they're a big part of what we're doing. It's a brand new service. They're maturing, evolving. The threats from China and Russia are very, very real. And we are a critical part of what we do there at the Cape is obviously a critical part of their long-term success to protect our interests in space. Because, GPS satellites, Global Star, one of our sponsors, yes, absolutely. Making sure those assets are protected so you guys can use them. Because I guarantee you, you use space, but I guarantee you don't know exactly how reliant you are on space. But having Space Force be able to protect our assets in space is a critical part of our national security. And this is just sort of a reflection. We like to quote that we're a quintimodal spaceport. You can do stuff at the Cape. You can not only get anywhere via roads, rail, air, sea, but we also go up and stuff. Now we're increasingly landing and bringing stuff back to space, which again is a big part of our future. This is really an interesting new development that Space Florida has become increasingly involved in, and it's deconfliction. In the past, during the shuttle launches, shuttle days, you would occasionally have a launch scrubbed because you had a boat or an airplane or a helicopter in the restricted zone, and they had to scrub a launch. And you also have commercial aviation, and there's a hell of a lot of commercial aviation, as I'm sure you're aware, that's going up the east coast of Florida. Well, in the old days, it used to be commercial aviation and maritime traffic would get out of the way or fly around or delay a flight because you had a NASA or a national security launch. But now you're asking Delta or Disney or Southwest to lose money and inconvenience their customers so Elon Musk can make more money. That's a problem. That is government needing to come in and manage activity because you have an existing airspace, an existing sea space where industry is already thriving and growing, and you've got an entirely new industry moving in and establishing a presence. And it's an industry that's absolutely imperative to our national security and our economic growth, but you have competing interests for the same airspace and sea space. So we're having to help manage that because you've also got fishermen, because when they have now with SpaceX, they can do polar launches. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but we can now launch polar, and we haven't done that since the 60s because the vehicles weren't robust enough. And we tried it once in 1963, I think, and the second stage fell on Cuba, killed a cow, and Castro had a field day, so we stopped doing it. But now with SpaceX, the vehicles are robust enough, we can put things into polar orbit. And so you have launches that are going east, and the vehicle and the payload are transiting right offshore here from Miami. It won't be too long when the lighting is correct, probably in the evening when the sunset's coming, that you'll be able to, it'll be a really neat show. The lighting will need to be perfect, but we're doing more and more of that. But when that happens, they close off that second busiest cruise terminal in the world. And that gets to be a real problem because if you've got 9 ships coming in on a Thursday or a Sunday and they get delayed, that backs up a hell of a lot of traffic at Orlando International Airport because half of the seats on the planes are cruise terminals. And then that cascades through the whole national airspace, and America's got a problem. So managing all of this is a real challenge. I mean, it's a great problem to have, but it's a real problem, and it's got to be done well. So Space Florida's hosted some meetings there, particularly working with the recreational boaters and the commercial fishermen, because the commercial airlines and the commercial sea traffic, those are professional captains. They're used to paying attention to the Coast Guard and the FAA. But you get somebody out there fishing with more beer than bait, and if you scrub a launch, that's millions of dollars. And General Purdy, who manages the range, gets real fussy when some idiot's done something stupid. And in this case, about 18 months ago, it's one thing when it's a drunk fisherman. It's another thing when it's the captain of a vessel with 5,000 tourists on it. That caused a real problem, and the Coast Guard hasn't released the results of their investigation yet, but that's going to be interesting. But I wanted to primary close on, this is our last slide. And that really gets to what I think is the primary message I want to leave you with is Space Florida is looking towards the future where we see ourselves as helping to grow Florida into being the equivalent of what London was to the British Empire 200 years ago. Not the only port, but the primary port where people and cargo and new ideas are transiting so that the economic activity that's going to occur in space, and is already, but we're already having manufacturing. Space Florida financed the first piece of equipment on the International Space Station that did manufacturing of a product that was brought down to Earth for sale on the open market. It was fiber optic cable, because you can get fiber optic cable manufactured much more perfectly in microgravity than you can here on Earth, and there's a market for that. So we financed a $1 million piece of equipment that was up there, still is up there, and I told my boss that if we need to go repossess it, I'll be happy to go do that. But doing manufacturing, mining, energy production, healthcare, because we're finding really interesting things about cancer cells when they're in microgravity. There's a lot of evidence that says they don't stop replicating, but they significantly slow down. That's going to be a space, health tourism into suborbital. But, getting solar power generated in space when you don't have the atmosphere to go through it, and you can have solar panels that are miles wide and beaming it down safely, which we know how to do. We're going to have, Jeff Bezos put it right, who's a nice Miami high school graduate from Miami, at his valedictorian speech at Princeton. He said, "We plunder the earth for minerals and energy. We ravage the earth for minerals and energy, when all the energy and minerals mankind could ever need are up there in the asteroid belts. Let's move mining and heavy industry off of the planet and return Earth to zoned residential." That's a pretty neat image. So we're trying to figure, and I think it's moving in that direction. We're trying to see to it, working closely with folks like you, with the airports and the seaports and the roads and the rail, to see to it that when there is a lot of economic activity going on between the solar system and planet, and that's not 50 years away, that's now, and it's getting bigger every year. I mean, when you're going to hundreds of launches a year, and there's increasing manufacturing, there's going to be a launch this year of private sector people sending robots to asteroids to make sure exactly what kind of metals there are, because all the rare earth metals that are a problem here, they're all up there. And it's not going to be humans mining it, it's going to be robots. But still, everything we need here is up there in mass. So we want to position Florida to be the home of where that activity occurs, the dominant port of entry and departure. So making sure that we're integrated with the roads and rails and all that other stuff so that it can, if you want to get from anywhere on the planet to here to get into orbit, the transportation network is there. But more important for the future is the stuff that comes back down to Earth. We want it to come here and then get to everywhere on the planet. Because the goal is the reason we go to space is to make life good down here. So on that, the only thing I'll leave you with is the kind of skill sets that you guys do down here, we're going to need up there. Because as we expand human enterprise in space, we're going to need, everybody's not going to be an engineering astronaut. We're going to need plumbers. We're going to need farmers. We're going to need cooks. We're going to need construction managers. And tragically, we're going to need attorneys. And on that, I'll end. Thank you.